Hello and welcome to the 6th in the APM series. In this video we'll talk about the log files that are there on the APM 2.5 2.6 board, and it's something that not everybody uses and gets the benefit from, and we'll cover that in the next 10-15 minutes. The main two logs that we're going to be talking about here are the telemetry and data flash logs, and then what we'll do is we'll delve into each of those and we'll look at how you set them up, what you can actually record, what's been recorded by default, and then what you do to get hold of the logs once you finish your flights, and also do analysis and actually view those flights in 3 dimensions on things like Google Earth, which is kind of cool. The time will be spent in the video looking at data flash logs rather than the telemetry ones. Let me just very briefly explain the difference between the two. You can get the same functionality pretty much out of both of them. The data flash logs are actually stored locally on the APM board, and it's storing the statistics and information that you set up on the board locally in essentially non-volatile memory. Now, if you've been flying your APM, you probably have logs on it already that you didn't know were there, so you can very quickly connect up your APM via the USB cable to Mission Planner on your PC and have a look at those and review them without having to do much else. The nice thing about that is once you have all those data flash logs, you'll find there's actually 3 files downloaded. One of them is kind of a delimited file of stuff that you can actually have a quick review via Mission Planner. You can actually delve into the details and get into the nitty-gritty of the values as you fly, and the other thing is something called a KMZ file, which is actually used with Google. Telemetry is slightly different. So telemetry are files and logs that are not created on the APM itself while it's flying. It's actually created. It's essentially a recording of the telemetry data that you're getting down the MAV link, typically wireless when you're flying, onto Mission Planner. So, for instance, if you haven't already set this up, you probably won't have any telemetry logs on the Mission Planner console itself, and if you want to use it, you can set it up, and then next time you fly, as long as you have a wireless connection up to the machine, as that information is streamed down and populating the display, it's also been recorded locally, and that can then be converted later, so you have the same kind of functionality as you do in the data flash logs. So let's start by looking at the setup and how you check what you've already got on the machine. If you've already got an APM board that you've been flying with, pretty much guarantee you'll have some data flash logs. So let's look at those first, at how you mooch around and find what's on the board. So here we are in Mission Planner on the netbook, and everything that I'm going to cover in here is available on the copter.rdpilot.com website, and if you need to know the full link, then it's actually in the description below this video, but it's rdpilot.com/wiki/downloading-and-data-logs-in-mission-planner. So anything that you want to know in more depth about this, because I'm only going to go through this at an introductory level, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty because it could be a 2-hour video. I think everyone would fall asleep unless we hit something that's particularly interesting. When I'm talking about something you want to know more, go to that website. It has lots of information, including, as you can see, all of the information about what all of the data flash messages are in Ardocopter. So let's go and have a look if there are any data flash logs available on this board, and also see what recording bits and bobs is set up. Now, to look at this, we have to go into Terminal, we have to click on Connect when the board starts. Here we go, it'll take a second. The logs is obviously the one we want to have a look at, so we type in logs, hit the enter key, and here we go. It tells us that the logging is enabled, which is exactly what we're expecting, and if you have an APM board and not played with this at all, this is pretty much what you'll have set up on yours by default. Attitude med, That's medium attitude, so that's the position of the craft. It's recording GPS, it's recording the power management bits and pieces. C-ton is throttle and altitude information. N-ton, I think, is the navigation data, commands and the current that's being used, and that's all been saved down locally to the board's memory. Now, one thing that you have to see here is that there are 10 logs, and the logs overwrite each other, so it never runs out of memory, although you can clear the logs, and we'll look at that later. So of the 10 logs that are here, you can see some of them are very short and sweet, because these are blocks, so you can think of them as, so the difference between the two numbers is how big the log is. Okay, so we've got logs we can play with here, so what we'll do is we'll click on log download, and it'll show us all this information about the logs that are on the board, and then on the left hand side here we get the option of which logs we want to download. And I've already downloaded all of these to play with, but we'll just download one. So I'll highlight 10 and we'll click on download these logs, and what you'll find is just on where it says clear logs, this will start doing something. It's very faint, so it's not easy to see. In fact, let's pick one that's really short. A lot of them are very similar. Let's go for 10. So let's just download these logs. And you'll see it says dump, which I always think is quite funny. It's probably the English humour. And then you can see it says here, just above where the icon is, reading, and then you're getting all these bits and pieces. And this is actually streaming down the log data from the machine locally into a subdirectory that will be under where the Mission Planner program is actually stored on the hard drive of this computer, but we'll have a look at that in a second. Now this will take a minute, so I'm just going to shut up and fast forward this bit of video, and we'll come back to it when it's finished. Okay, so there we go. Just got an error message because I've already downloaded this log before, but it takes a little while. It's not instant, so be prepared to wait for it and keep watching that. So now I've got all the logs. If we wanted to, we could click on clear logs here and actually clear the memory, but I just like to keep the logs there. You never know we're going to need them again, and we can close that up. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just have a quick look at where these log files have been downloaded from when we downloaded them via the terminal tab. Here they are. So in the program files directory, Mission Planner is where Mission Planner is installed, subdirectory called logs, and here's all the logs that have been downloaded, and each log is actually 3 files. One is a KMZ file, which we'll look at in a moment with our friend Google Earth, which is quite fun. Next is a text document with kind of all the plain bits and pieces in it, and then finally there's the log file, which you can review using Mission Planner. So these are the actual, each one of these 3 things, you can see it's called the date followed by the time of the flight. So what we'll do is we'll jump back into Mission Planner and we'll have a look at one of these. So we'll click on log analysis. We're in data flash logs, log analysis. We'll pick one of them. Let's try him. Now what's actually happening is Mission Planner is looking at the log file, reading all the information, checking it, and coming up with a report that will appear in a white box in a second, and that will give us information on the flight bits and pieces. Here we are, and what actually happened. So here, for example, absolutely everything's fine apart from we crashed. That probably sounds about right. And it's also saying that we're underpowered, which I'd agree, because on this model I'm having to use about 60% throttle in order to hover because of a lot of additional weight I've added to it. So looking at this, I would say this is telling me, yeah, you probably need to upgrade your motors and props. That's something I'll look at. So that's a very quick and easy way to make sure that you won't have any problems with any of the GPS or the bits and pieces. So what we'll do is now we can look at that same log file in more detail. We click on review a log this time, ask us which one. Let's pick the same one. We know it ends in a crash, which is always sad. And here is the full details. So you have a graph at the top which shows you the value of that parameter through the flight. and then underneath you have all the log file information about what's going on moment by moment. And on the right hand side you can actually choose what parameters you want to have a look at. Now I'm not going to go through what all these parameters are. Some of them are obvious, like ATON is things like the rates and the gains. ATT is attitude, so in here you've got things like the role input, the actual role of the craft, so you can see how well it's responding to control inputs. And you've also got things like GPS. So if you pick one of these, we can graph it along the top and have a look. So let's have a look at something like roll in and roll. That's not a very good one. Let's try error crash check, it says at the top, I believe that. So here we go. Let's have a look at what was going on with this flight. And you can see here that the control input is the red line and the craft's response is the green line, and there are some really nasty overshoots here, so I would say that there probably needs to be some PID tuning on this craft as well, because it's not flying particularly well. So this is something that I could have a look at, and again you can actually see here that I'm flicking from stabilize into altitude hold. In fact, this looks like it's one of the flights where I was doing some PID tuning using the auto tune function on the craft. That's probably why we're getting some of these really wacky overshoots here. Okay, well that kind of makes sense. So that's how you use the graphing function to see what's going on. The next thing we'll do then is we'll look at the data and look at that in Google Earth, so you can see what the flight actually looked like. And I like keeping these files. There's something I've used with the Easy OSD on-screen display, which is like £120, and it actually is a standard part of how the data is collected from our friend APM. So let's just pause here, let me fire up Google Earth and we'll have a look. So here we are in Google Earth. I've opened Google Earth just by double clicking on the KMZ file that's part of the logs, and here we have on the left hand side under the normal data in my places we have this section called temporary spaces, which is actually the KMZ file that Google Earth is interpreting, and under here we have the 4 flight paths of the different modes that the plane was in. Then we have the plane and waypoints, and just for simplicity let's just start with stabilized. So in this flight, for example, and let me just show you how cool this is, if you rotate around you can actually see the height. Looks like a fantastic roller coaster, doesn't it? But this is actually me just mooching around, making sure the craft is behaving. That is actually where I took off, and you can see that I've just been having a whale of a time flying around the field. Then once I'd finished in stabilize, I actually put it into altitude hold to play with that. There's a whole load more of altitude hold flying just to see how it performed as I flew around the field. Let's just turn that one off. That's very. Then the stabilize, so I put it back into stabilize and then continue to fly around, and then finally I did a return to launch, which looked like, this is always good to see. Here we go. So what actually happened here was I was flying along reasonably low level, stuck it into return to launch, it rose to the return to launch height that's in Mission Planner, then it came straight back, look at that, and then got over the position and then finally landed at my feet. And if we actually look at how close the landing point was to where it took off, so let's turn off the stabilize, go back to the first stabilize where I launched. It was very close, actually, very close. I'll just move it around. It looks like at the very last minute, yeah, it did. It actually came down, wandered away slightly, and then landed within a couple of feet. So this is a really nice way for you to record the information and to view it in Google Earth. You can actually have it display other bits and pieces in here and waypoints as well, but for clarity I'm keeping those both turned off so you can actually see the flight in 3D. Let's go back to Mission Planner to look at the final bit of the telemetry logs. So we've been spending our time looking at the data flash logs, and that is all of the locally stored data about the different parameters that are happening on the APM in a couple of files that you can then download, save on your PC and use to troubleshoot, review and record your flights. What we also have here is things called telemetry logs. Now these telemetry logs are logs that are data that's saved here on the PC, and it happens automatically whenever you're looking at a craft that's flying. And typically with telemetry logs you'd use something like these radio links, and these are 433 megahertz radio links that you can maintain connection with the craft while it's flying with. Allows you to kind of do point and click flying and to monitor it as it flies. All that data that's coming over that link wirelessly is saved here on the PC in a log file, and those log files can actually be loaded and then reviewed back. Now that log file actually is just one out of a test. It isn't big enough for us to use here, but once you've loaded it you can actually play it back at different speeds, and the windows will behave in exactly the same way as they did when you were flying the craft. So the artificial horizon, the GPS information, the position, direction on the screen, the modes that it's in, everything will play back at either normal speed, or you can really slow it down, or you can whiz through it if it was a nice long flight at 10 times the speed. Or what you can do is then you can convert the telemetry log into KML or graph, so you can do similar things that we did with the data flash logs in the last segment. So hopefully that's useful for those of you who are looking at logs. We could probably do another 2 or 3 videos, and I may in the future getting into the nitty-gritty of how you choose what to record and other bits and pieces. But what I'd recommend is spend a bit of time on that web page, have a mooch through, and you'll find an awful lot of information that you never knew existed on the APM. I must admit, until I started playing with log files on the APM, I didn't realize how sophisticated the logging and review functions were. So thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.